Welcome to DNW, the podcast where we talk to a variety of people from different fields about our ever-changing world. My name is Rogier van Bemmel, and today is my lucky day because I'm joined by Thomas Moore. Hello Thomas, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I'm always a bit annoyed about all the Zoom calls and the Skype calls we have to do nowadays, but I must say today I feel very blessed that we have this opportunity because you're joining us not from Leiden, but you're in your home in New Hampshire, is that, if I'm correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, all the way from across the pond. Yes. Perhaps I'll start off by introducing you really quick to our listeners and viewers. Most people know you as a writer of spiritual and psychological books, but before that you were born in 1940, joined a Catholic monastery in the early 50s, left the monastery in the mid 60s, just before you were to be ordained as a Catholic priest. And then you pursued the academic path, religious studies for a while. That didn't really work out, and then you found your way to being the man we all know, the psychotherapist, who also writes a lot of books. And I think the pinnacle of your fame or your breakthrough came in 1992 when you published Care of the Soul. I have it here. 1992, a very well-known book, and as we talked last week to prepare a little bit for this broadcast, and I really like the way you put it. Like your fame has waned a little bit since then, but it's landed in sort of a sweet spot where you feel very comfortable. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes, it was to me it was very exciting and wonderful to have so many people reading my words. That was unusual. It just happened overnight. And also having openings to speak in many places in the world. But that has settled down, and now my connections seem a little less excited and more calm. And I like that. I like the fact that I still have connections all over the world, and it's great honor and treat for me to speak to you today. And so if I can keep doing this, I'm happy.
Yeah, that sounds it sounds like a good life. And you added something to that as well when we spoke. You sort of defined like the reason people reach out to you, that because you've written a lot about the soul and the importance of doing soulful therapy. Actually, your last book is called Soul Therapy, and it's just been. Let me put that up to the camera as well. It's just been released in Dutch last year. I don't know, Dirk, if you have it when I hold it up like this, but. And actually, at the end of this broadcast, let's give this one away to one of our viewers. So I'll come back to that. But yeah, so the last book you've written is actually called Soul Therapy, and yeah, you're putting the soul in therapy for a lot of people. That's. So you're being called on or being reached out to when it comes to speaking about the soul. Is that right?
Oh yes. So a lot of people are still confused about this word soul. When I first started using it, I don't think it was used in common conversations much at all. But that has changed over time. But now we have a new problem because people mean so many different things by it. I'm an academic to some extent. That's part of who I am, and I have studied the soul in history and in philosophy, and so my thoughts about the soul are not quite as sweet as a lot of the current discussions about soul are. I think about it. I would like to say, I think about it quite deeply. And I like using the word because it's been around for centuries to talk about something that to me is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so shall we start our conversation today perhaps just on the topic of the soul and how we can approach it in therapy and maybe in our spirituality as well, which is another topic you write on quite extensively. Would I be right in setting your talking about the soul up in thinking about images and thinking about imagery and archetypal stories as an entryway to that dimension of our lives? Would that be a good characterization?
Yes, yes. The soul is very mysterious, and to me the word mystery is a very positive thing. I love to consider mysteries, the fact that the world is mysterious in so many ways. In fact, I would define religion in the best sense of the word as finding ways to relate to the mysteries of our lives and the mystery of the world in which we live. Like, for example, in religion, instead of trying to define everything, although they do that sometimes, religion has created things like rituals and sacred buildings with an architecture that is not the normal architecture of our lives, and music and paintings, so many things that religion has used to engage the mysteries that are around us without having to explain them. So to me, that's very important, and that's at the heart of my idea of the soul. That mysterious part of ourselves and the world around us too, that is very influential in who we are and what we do, but can't be easily explained or even described.
Hmm. Yeah, and your way of approaching, because your part of your way in life has been that you've done a lot of academic research, but your writing is actually you're one of those people that managed to speak about deep things through simple words or like relatable stories, which I really like about your writing. It's a sort of wisdom that does not have to be doesn't have to be proud about its wisdom. It's just talking about something in very normal words, and you use these archetypal images for this. Can we perhaps take one of them as an example? Perhaps
Yes.
the way you talk about Persephone, or perhaps Venus, or I think you've written a lot about Venus in different books.
Yes, I have. Venus, or I don't know how you would say Aphrodite, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this goddess among the Greeks is so important to us. It has to do with our love, anything we might love or like. You can look at your home from a Venus point of view through the lens of Venus. And when you do that, you will appreciate its beauty. It doesn't have to be conventional beauty and to be particularly expensive or, that kind of beauty, but your own sense of the beautiful could be there. So the Venus is like a lens rather than an object. So we see through that archetypal image of Venus, and we can see beauty everywhere. I don't know what you would think about this. We do talk, you and I have talked astrologically. I have Venus on my midheaven, and I feel, I know many people do, but I feel that that this is my approach to life, my approach to everything I do. I want it to be beautiful. Mm-hmm. I think beauty is important in the presentation of an idea, for example. When I write a book, I spend a lot of time with the publisher trying to get a beautiful cover and everything about it done with beauty. And I think that's part of the power that you have. She is a very powerful goddess. Now, when I say that, I mean, I'm not worshiping at an actual temple of Venus. What I'm saying is that there is a quality of human life today that has to do with beauty. And we can look at beauty through that, as I say, through that lens and operate in that way. And it gives us potency, power. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm looking for, a certain kind of potency. So when I write my books, I'm looking, I really would love it if someone would say to me, that's a beautiful book. That the writing is beautiful. That would mean a great deal to me. Because I spend so much effort in trying to bring Venus into the presentation of my books. And not just how they look, but how they read. And the ideas, beautiful ideas. Not just ideas that you say are true or factual, but that are beautiful. And I think that if you have a beautiful idea, you can live it better, more intensely than if you have a factual idea.
Yeah, that really fits with Venus on the MC. Yeah, again, it's not only doing things beautifully, as you've explained very beautifully, I think, but also that you like to present yourself to the world, or that your public role has to do something with Venusian qualities, also of communication and of kindness. And I think especially that kindness and that beauty and that sense of balance really shines through in your books. They are very gentle books, very tactful books. I don't know if that's an English word actually, but tact.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, they do have, perhaps they do have that quality. Perhaps we should set that up a little bit more though, because you've started, which I really love, talking about astrology. But I don't know if all the readers and all the viewers and listeners can relate to that instantaneously. But so there's a quality in your books of trying to address the mysteries, and not by spelling everything out that has to be said about the mystery, but evoking images that help us relate to these mysteries. And one of these images you've just explained might be a Venusian or an Aphrodite look at the world. So you look at her beauty, but you can also look at the vicissitudes of like a Venusian quality. You can be very kind, but you can perhaps also be too kind in a way sometimes. And all these, an archetypal image like that allows us to address these dimensions, these more mysterious dimensions and correlations in the world around us, without having to spell them out or beating them to death with words. Would that be? And yeah, and that's one of the ways you use it in the book. So yeah, where can we maybe find an example for the people before we take it into the astrological domain?
Yes, there's something else I think ought to be said at this moment, and that is that I was heavily influenced many years ago by my friend James Hillman, who's a Jungian analyst who went his own direction. And one of his earliest publications was an article called Psychological Polytheism. And what he meant by that is that we're talking today here about, at the moment, about Venus. But there are other figures in the Greek system, let's say, that are always in play as well, and it's difficult to talk about just one. The other one that I was going to mention when you introduced this idea was Hermes. Hermes, because Hermes is the god who is the guide of souls, they said. He was the one who guided souls. And you see paintings and sculptures of him in the midst of taking people into the underworld. And I think that is also a figure, a spirit, that is very important to me, that gives me potency. So when I'm writing a book, I want Hermes to be there as well, because he is also the god associated with language and images and at the same time guidance. And so I want that spirit of Hermes with me to give me the language that will be potent. So I really pay close attention to language. I study grammar all the time. I read books on grammar to make sure that I'm using the language as powerfully as I can. And the other thing about Hermes is that he was a deceiver and a liar. He didn't tell the truth. And there's something, and he was a thief. Hermes the thief. There have been some a couple of books written that are called Hermes the Thief, very fine books. What that means is that he is an archetypal figure who represents the fact that life takes things from us as well as gives us something. That life steals from us. It steals friends. If friends die, and Hermes takes them to the underworld. And we lose health. We lose our health sometimes. Hermes takes the health away from us. We lose money. He really takes that money away. And but he's a wonderful god. He's considered one of the really most potent and important of the gods. So when I talk about Venus, I'm also very inclined to immediately mention Hermes because he's a darker figure, much darker.
Yeah.
And I think that the combination of the two, hermaphrodite, is a very potent image.
Yeah, it's also very. It's getting stronger in our time as well, in a way, and weaker, you could say, in a sense as well. But let's not venture into that particular rabbit hole, perhaps.
Okay.
You mentioned, perhaps later, you mentioned your friendship with James Hillman, and also that being one of the roots of starting to think archetypally.
Yes.
But you've also did a lot of research and original research yourself very early on in your career about Ficino, the 15th century Renaissance thinker, who was also an astrologer. Was that before or after James Hillman started to think about these things? Or was this?
It was simultaneously. It was exactly the same time.
And did you know each other back then already, or was that connection later?
I did not. I began a correspondence with Hillman when I was doing my doctoral studies at Syracuse University in New York.
Oh, yeah.
And we exchanged. He would send me the articles he was writing. He wasn't publishing books at the time, and so we corresponded for maybe 2 years, and then we met in person. And then we got along very well, became very close friends, and worked together, lectured together, and traveled together. We did many things together.
So that friendship goes back to the late 70s then?
It goes back to the late 70s. Probably I met him in 1976 or 7, yes.
Okay. So can you perhaps because you've still looking for some words, as you notice, and you're trying to complement the Venusian quality with also the mercurial or the Hermes qualities. But you got to look like very, very early on, even as the archetypal astrology, which later was developed by people like Richard Tarnas. Even before they started doing that, you were already looking at this medieval thinker that had like the whole concert of planets and qualities of life to his disposal, and you started to study him in the original Latin, I believe.
Yes. There weren't many books in English for me at the time, or articles. There were some coming from London, but I didn't have much available. And certainly the book of his that interested me, that interests most people, is called, generally the larger title is De Vita Triplici, which means 3 books on life. One of those books, the third, is called De Vita Celitus Comparanda. I don't know how to translate that too well. It's on life arranged in the way of the sky. Celitus is an adverb for the sky. Skyly, we don't say that in English, skyly, but that would be the translation, according to the sky. So what he was writing about was how to design your life and shape your life, make your decisions about your way of life.
Isn't that often translated as the harmony of the spheres? I'm sorry, there's a small delay on the. I think I interrupted you there, but
no, that's right.
Like the harmony of the heavenly spheres, like the concert of the heavenly spheres and how it influences life. Would that be?
It's in the background. It's not exactly. We'd have to really look at that closely.
Okay.
Yes, I have been interested in this idea of the harmony of the spheres, and I've written about it, actually. Early in my career, I wrote about that. Pythagoras and then Ficino and Robert Flood. So many people have seen the world musically. And I've lived an intense life of music in my life. I've been a very intense musician all my life. And so this idea of the harmony of the spheres appealed to me when I was quite young. And I wrote, when I first started writing things, I wrote about that. I found it very romantic and inspiring. And Ficino has that background, but actually his work is slightly different. His work is more about understanding how the planets are embedded, the spirit of the planets are embedded in our world, especially the world around us. It could be nature. So, for example, Ficino would say that if we want a more Venusian spirit in our life, let's say just having talked about Venus, you'd say, well, I'd like to have more Venus in my life. Ficino would say, wear a green shirt, or paint the walls of one of your rooms in your house, Venusian green. And how do you know what is Venusian green? You figure that out for yourself. You find yourself what a Venusian green, what kind of green would give you that Venusian pleasure and sensuous quality. I find it, by the way, in certain painters, I find that Venusian green. And so I know for myself what that would be, and I want to have that in my life somewhere.
I think I can see it on your wall, on the wall behind you. I think it's
yes, I have some green. Yes,
actually, it's the same. I visited the how do you say the working rooms or the studies of both Goethe and Schiller 2 weeks ago when I was in Germany, and they both have, of course, based on the Goethean Farbenlehre, his color science. They both have green. They both have green studies because it gives a tranquility to the mind that is conducive to studying and writing.
Yeah.
So,
well, see, you could say that this is a very calming color, and you know that. But if you wanted to learn more from Ficino, he would say, understand that this is a color that will invite the spirit of Venus into your life. That's really the way he organized his whole everything, based on the planets. And so my book on Ficino is called The Planets Within. And that's what I mean by it, that the planets are within everything, the spirit of the planets. And he would say, if we could sort those out, we would be able to shape our life. De vita celitus camperanda. Camperanda mean like kind of shaping it according to the planets.
I think it's so interesting because actually I came to your work through like your later works like Soul Therapy and Care of the Soul, and then to find out that you had actually found that in ancient astrology or like medieval astrology, which is basically the same. But on a time where the actual archetypal astrology that I know through like other sources, and which I also work with in a way, that you came up with this, or you found this on your own, and then later the rivers merged, and you met Richard Tarnas, you told me, I think, and well, you know of the writings of Robert Hand, for example. So it's one of these interesting moments in time where the same idea pops up in different places, and you were one of these places, obviously, and it's very fascinating.
Yes, if I can tell you that story just very briefly, it's one that many people tell. But I was supposed to write my dissertation at Syracuse, and I didn't know, I couldn't think of a good topic, and so I went into the music section of the library one day, and I just saw a collection of black-bound books on the very high, and I could just reach them to pull one down so it would fall off the shelf into my hands, and I opened it up, and there was a long quotation from Ficino, whom I had never heard of before. And it just appealed to me so much. What it said, I'll tell you what it said in brief. It said, the passage said that because the body doesn't have any inherent principle of movement, and because the mind can't connect well with the body, we need soul to be between the mind and the body. And I thought, oh, that's exactly right. I thought that was exactly right, in that I recognized that I've been doing this all my life, that I was never an intellectual, and I was never an athlete, or I was never, that my place where I feel at home is in the soul. I know that so well. And I thought, I can write about this, certainly. And I thought I would write it and it would be over with, but I'm still talking about it today. I'm still working on it after all these years.
Yeah, well, it's a never-ending gold vein, of course. The soul. Perhaps I feel I perhaps haven't done the best job of enabling you to put some flesh on the bone, so to speak. So we've talked about Venusian qualities, we've talked about mercurial qualities, but perhaps it's time to dive a little bit deeper into your thought. We've done some of the origin stories, which are very interesting and also entertaining. But perhaps you are, or perhaps your last book, so Soul Therapy. You try to introduce this method of making the soul available or being able to talk about the soul to a wider audience, not just of psychotherapists like yourself. You've taught a lot of psychotherapists. In that way, the book resembles The Gift of Therapy from Irvin Yalom very much, which we've talked about, that's one of your sources. But the book expands this idea to, okay, everyone can be a therapist. Everyone can be concerned about the soul, can care for the soul of others. So that's an interesting thought, that you think everyone can be a psychotherapist in a way.
Yes, I start with the more academic idea that the word psychotherapy, if you look at it, the origins of the word in Greek, they're for Greek words, almost just two Greeks smashed together in English. One is psyche, which means soul for the Greeks. It doesn't mean mind or behavior or anything else. It means soul. Where the psyche for the Greeks goes to the underworld after death. As I said, Hermes is guiding the soul, the psyche to the underworld all the time. Therapeia in Greek, and we get this very clearly in Plato. Plato writes about therapy, and uses therapeia. And he says the word therapeia means service or care. Service or care. So this is something we can do for each other. A lot of people, when they hear that, might say, well, I'm not qualified. Well, to care for someone and to serve someone doesn't take too many qualifications, except to be a caring human being. And if you know something about human behavior, if you're smart about that, that would help, certainly. But you don't have to be a professional. So some psychiatrists that I know didn't like my book, Soul Therapy, for that reason. They thought, I'm making it too light. I'm suggesting that anyone can go and open a practice of therapy. I don't mean it that way. I mean that somebody might call you, a relative or a friend might call you one day and say, I'm having trouble in my marriage. Could I talk to you about it? Could we have lunch together? I think that's when actually you're being called at that point to be that person's therapist in the deeper, less professional sense of the word. In the Greek sense of the word, the way the word began. And so it's a special kind of friendship or connection you have with them, though, because they want you to help them, guide them in some way. So that's part of this guidance. And so I'm suggesting this book that if we all could have some confidence in our ability to actually guide someone else and help them a bit, not professionally and not when they're really in some sort of clinical problem. But if you could just guide in an ordinary getting through life, that is a very important role to play in life. And I know I don't have to use that word therapist for it, but I think that by saying that, I connected up with this practice that's been going on for centuries and centuries of being a caretaker, a therapist for each other. And I think we could restore that and give people more confidence, and we could help each other out more often.
Yeah, which is an important thought, I think. And interestingly, a thought that it's to be found by more experienced, down to earth, like Irvin Yalom or yourself, like experienced therapists. And I think you even mentioned that James Hillman was thinking in this vein also, that it's the more relaxed, sure of themselves, experienced therapists that say, no, everyone can do this. It's just, if you listen with intent, if you don't say the wrong things, if you let the conversation breathe, how can we widen this these points a bit? So listening intently, leaving room for mystery, not trying to solve everything straight away, not giving too much advice. Can we make it a bit more practical like that? Is that a way? Can we explore that?
Yes. So the soul part of it, soul therapy, would be that you're not trying to be technical about it. You're not looking, first of all, for a diagnosis or for a label to put on the person's behavior, or you're not looking for a stock, a standard kind of treatment for the person. What you're doing is more engaging this human being and you yourself as a human being. That's what you're doing primarily. I was originally trained as a therapist in Carl Rogers and Rogerian therapy. So it's very much in that spirit of being very human and being yourself a person dealing with another person, and not you as this doctor who has got his bag of diagnoses and treatments. But rather you are a human being and you want to talk to this human being in a way that might be useful to them, at least momentarily, the best you can. And so you don't worry about not being qualified. As a human being, you're qualified. Having lived life, you're qualified. If you've lived with some sincerity and given yourself to life, you're really qualified to talk to somebody else. And you don't have to cure them. It's not about cure. That's not what it's about. Therapy is not about curing. It's about caring, which is a very different thing. I think you could study the word care more carefully, see it as a heart word, a word of the heart rather than the mind. Much of our therapy is mind activity. So it's really an activity of the heart, and it's making that heart connection that can be very, very helpful to people to feel that someone is really listening to them and caring about what's happening with them.
Perhaps one of the ways, this is a question I had when I was reading Soul Therapy, and it's a thought I agree with to an extent, but I also perhaps don't. It's that you say everyone can be a therapist, or if you're a therapist, it's a calling. Which for you it obviously is. And I think for many people it can be a calling. And although you point out that has its own neuroses or that has its own dark sides, still you say that you have to be a therapist all the time. You're never not a therapist. You're a therapist when you interact with the bellboy, or when you're at the shops, or when you meet someone in the streets. And I would like to pick that apart a bit, if we may.
Yes.
Perhaps. So perhaps we can start with you just explaining what you mean by that statement a bit better than I just did, and then we can perhaps wrestle a bit about that definition.
What I mean by it is that I think that if you're a therapist, I learned this from watching Hillman, being with him. He was always the therapist, or maybe not in this narrow sense of going out to analyze people all the time, but rather interested in the soul. It's the soul aspect of the psychotherapy that you have to keep in mind. So, for example, we would be walking the street and we'd see someone on the street who was acting in kind of a strange way. And Hillman would say, isn't it interesting what the psyche does, you know, how the psyche expresses itself? And that's part of his theory as well, that the psyche pathologizes, he says, that the psyche itself gets itself into unusual, painful, and conflicted situations, that the psyche does this. This is what the psyche is. This is not an aberration. This is what the psyche does. Mm-hmm. That's quite a radically different idea about who we. A lot of times we think we are normally normal.
Yeah, no, it cuts out.
Other times we are not.
It cuts out normal. But I mean, in that sense, I mean, if you're a soul caretaker or you're interested in a soul, obviously that's not something you can turn off. But still, it's also, there can be a quality, and that's, I think you've alluded to this already, like, and there's a quality in therapists or in helpers that they can never not help, or they can never not, and that's even worse, analyze other people. So they're constantly in this analyzing, wanting to go deeper, wanting to be very intense in every conversation. And I think in that sense, and I don't think that's the sense you meant it in, but in that sense it's perhaps also good to sometimes not be a therapist and just be able to be the one that's being taken care of, for example.
No, I don't agree.
Okay. Well, that's good. Why not?
You're taking me down a path there. No, that is not what I'm saying. The thing is, you see, the fact that we do things sometimes that are extreme and awkward and interfere and all these things you're describing, certainly people do that. And it's obnoxious when people are therapists like that all the time, that they can't stop. How can they have a marriage if they're analyzing their partner all the time?
Exactly.
Get that. But that only proves the point of what I'm trying to say. That is not it, what you're just saying. That is not what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's moving. It's like a symptom moving toward something, moving toward what we need. I'm saying what we need is, if you're going to be a therapist, be it, and don't just put on your coat or put out your sign 8 hours a day or whatever you do. Be it all the time. That's who you are. You are someone who thinks therapeutically. That doesn't mean you go and you do that in an absurd symptomatic way of analyzing everybody and being the superficial role of therapist all the time. No, it's a deep quality of who you are as a person. And you sustain that and you support it always. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I announced the path I was taking you on as being like different from what you perhaps meant, but just to get some, So sometimes you need a bit of antagonism to go a little bit deeper. But this is something you point out in your last book about James Hillman being difficult. He found it difficult to be to be seen, for example, as a son of his mother in certain private situations, and that might be a sign that there was something, perhaps, and I don't know him very well, so it's difficult to presume, but that there can be this quality of not being comfortable to be seen as a child, or be seen as dependent, or being in need of care yourself. It's like this. That might be more of this pathological part of being a therapist, maybe.
Oh yes, there's. You know what Jung said? Jung said that therapists are the most unconscious people of all. Therapists are always have to struggle. He implies that a therapist would be the worst kind of patient to have, because they try so hard. He says this: they try so hard to be conscious that they become quite unconscious. They don't know what they're doing. Hillman was quite unconscious in many ways, as I am. And I think that that's just part of it. You have to understand that as you strive so much to be aware and to try to hear so closely, intensely what your client is going through, to be aware of it and help them with that you yourself become quite unconscious. You don't really, you try too hard or you push it too hard. I think Jung is right about that. It's kind of a mysterious thing to say, but I think he's right. So, and I found Hillman to be, by the way, he was an Aries. His sun sign was Aries. And he really played that. He really was that. And he always had a weapon in his hand. And people were wounded by him right and left. And one time he and I gave a workshop, a 3-day workshop together. And afterwards I told him, I said, I'm never going to do a workshop again with you. I said, you have all these weapons out there and I'm the one picking everybody up and making them feel better. I don't like that role. I don't like either role. So I stopped that. I wouldn't work with him. He was like that. He was very tough on that Aries that type of Aries that's just combative. That's who he was. So so many therapists are like that. I think that they have such intensity in life, and they are so concerned to be aware of what's going on that they have a big gap. They move into the opposite place easily.
So that's not what you mean by being a therapist all the time. What you mean by being a therapist all the time is being careful and being full of care and having an eye out for other people's souls, perhaps.
Yes, and you see, the thing is, in this work that I do and that I got from Hillman and from another friend of mine, Robert Sardello, is what the Greeks called anima, or the Romans called anima mundi, the soul of the world. So this happened, by the way, with Hillman. At a certain point, he said to me, this is after we were working together for maybe 5 years, he said to me, I've stopped doing my therapy practice now. I'm going to do therapy of the world. And so he went then toward politics, toward city planning, and various topics, architecture, things like that. He has a whole set of videotapes on architecture from the psyche point of view, which is wonderful. And so he did that. And that's another aspect of this archetypal work. It is that we see the soul in the world, in things, the soul in things. We consider nothing to be inanimate. Anima. Inanimate means no anima. We consider everything to have anima, to have soul. And so that then opens up our world to do a lot of things. So being a therapist, as Sardello once said, he thought every building should have a therapist, not for the people in the building, but for the building.
Yeah, that's such a... that's one of my favorite passages, actually, from your last book, because you write about this architectural and the world in which we surround ourselves by furniture, by buildings, and by art, and it's very nice to see it written, because it's talked about and it's thought of so seldomly. The world has become so ugly in many respects. It's one of it's a very deep sadness, I think, of the state of our world. But what you touch on, this idea of being a therapist to the world, it's especially in this day and age, and I think you're a perfect person to speak of this. Like, we have a lot of very famous psychologists nowadays, like Gabor Mate or Jordan Peterson, and we have a lot of pretty famous therapists in the Netherlands and in Belgium as well, like in in the Dutch language countries. And I think there's obviously a need for this, and there's also a lot of these people are also interested in spirituality or in religion even, as you are. But still, sometimes we had a broadcast here just when Jordan Peterson was being sued by his, how do you say, the Psychology Association of Canada or whatever he's a part of. And we had a conversation about, is it possible for someone to be like a practicing therapist and also being very publicly involved? That's the first question. Perhaps the second question, even politically involved, as some of these people also are. How would you speak of this? How would you answer this question? Is it possible to see clients and also be an author, write, appear in public, say things about the state of the world, doing therapy for the soul of the world? Is that a difficult thing to combine?
Yeah, I think it's a very good thing. And I encourage, when I teach therapists, I often encourage them to speak to the world, that they sit there talking to people, a lot of them all day long. They do. Many therapists do an amazing number of hours of therapy. I can't believe it. I do minimal. Anyway, I encourage them to maybe get a program on radio or television, or appear on television, or write in the newspaper, or publish pamphlets or books or something, to get their knowledge that they have acquired, their very hands-on knowledge as therapists, and they learn how to deal with things. Many therapists I meet are very, very skilled, and I wish they could then not see that their work is only for their clients, that they are called as part of their work. What if they did just 5% of their work for the world in some way, in these ways I mentioned? And I've seen therapists occasionally appear in the radio or television or online, and if they're good therapists, they can help so much. They can, even if they can only give a little insight, they don't have to be profoundly educated and aware of what's going on. They don't have to be that, superior, but they could have whatever knowledge they have, they could pass it on. I really think that's a good way to extend the notion of being a therapist for the professional.
And have you ever experienced any problems? Because you've been very public. I mean, you've appeared on the bloody Oprah Winfrey show of all of all places. So it didn't get more public than that in the 90s, I believe. And I understand why. It was a very interesting show, and especially in that portion of time where the people were just opening up. Like in the 80s, the 12-step program was developed, and we were starting to talk publicly about spirituality. I mean, it was just perfect. But you were very public. Didn't that interfere with your client work, or have you ever experienced that? Because you write so you write very beautifully about this challenge of them projecting all sorts of Xanax archetypes on you as being the experienced, all-knowing and famous psychologist, and then they come to your practice and then you write. So I think you have a lot of interesting things to say about this. But have you ever experienced this tension of people projecting all this stuff onto you?
The way I get it, yes. The problem I have primarily is that once in a while people come to me with not expecting me to be a miracle worker, to be able to just do something and they'll feel better, just say a few words and they'll be fine. That's one way that problem appears. And another is that, I don't know if I should talk about this, but it's like in my home, I am two people. I am Thomas More and I am Tom. Here we would say Tom in our family. I'm Tom. Mm-hmm. And those are really like two personalities for me. And when I'm on the road, when I'm out doing things, I'm Thomas More. And then when I come home, I'm Tom again. I mean, I try not to split it too much, but it is quite clearly split. Well, a lot of people come to me for therapy to encounter Thomas More, but not me. I don't even see them looking at me like they're looking past me. Mm. So that's one of the difficulties of having a public life. But other than that, I really don't see any problem with it. See, one of the things I do is, this goes back to a previous conversation about doing therapy all the time. Yeah. One way I do it is we're sitting at home in our house at breakfast often, and the delivery man comes, like UPS here, I don't know what you would have there, and deliver a package, or a woman. And there was this woman coming for a while when my daughter and her partner were with us, and she was very depressed looking. She was very sad, and her face, everything, and her body posture was very depressed. So every day I'd go out and talk to her briefly for maybe a minute or two. And I told my family, I said, I'm doing a little therapy here. You know? It's not that I'm playing therapist. That's not what I want to do. I'm thinking that this idea of everyday therapy, that maybe I can just talk to this young woman in a way that will, in a very slight way, little words have a certain magical power sometimes. And I did that with her. And I remember one day my daughter coming in, she went out to meet her, and she came back and said, she was smiling and laughing today. And we thought, we've accomplished something here. And I might do the same when I'm in a store and go up to talk to somebody, and I see that I see that because I'm used to seeing reading facial expressions and things. And I will say, I will make a point of being able to say something therapeutic, but not playing therapist all the time, but just as a human being, trying to, and with some skills I might have, to be able to say something.
Yeah, so on the one hand, you're saying it's about genuinely caring for other people and other people's souls, and being a therapist in the sense that that's your calling, which I can follow. And on the other hand, you say, but there is a split there somewhere. There's a split between being Tom, like being a father, being a husband, being a friend, and being this more public persona.
Yes.
But you seem to me, if I might be so forthright, you seem like someone who's really genuine. You strike me as a very genuine person. So if you write about doing therapy, or if you talk about it, you seem to be. I can imagine that split not being that large for you, perhaps. And even you say, well, but there is a split. There is a difference between being Thomas More and being Tom.
At times it does interfere. It does interfere, but it's just that I would like to be able to be both, with a little of myself. I do try to allow myself to be present when I'm giving lectures and things like that, and talks. But I understand that role is important too. The persona is important, so I try to answer that. I try to do. But you're asking me, is this a problem, and should therapists like Jordan Peterson, is that his name? Yeah. You don't even know. I don't even know the people out there.
Oh, that's his name. Yeah.
I think that people can do that, but you can also do it superficially, and maybe for a lot of neurotic reasons, and I think that happens often too. So it's not a matter of whether a therapist should be public and speak to the political situations. I think they should, but it's more about then where are they speaking from and how are they doing it. That has to be done with certainly with a genuine relation to the world.
And so there's this other topic you somewhere in the book, and perhaps we should set this up a bit more. But let me make the little connection now, and then perhaps we can take some time to set it up more. But there's one again. You use James Hillman as an example, and you say, well, James was at the end of his life. He said something about the afterlife and him not being able to feel that there was something really there. And then you say, well, that makes it difficult for him to be a therapist of the soul in a way, because he blocks out a certain connection to the spiritual life, maybe. You could say, if we extend, and then you nuance it, and then you explore this idea without being too ideological about it, which I really like, of course, and which we will be able to do now as well, nuance it a bit. But that is the setup of your story there. you need to be able to experience it yourself in a way to also be able to talk to others about it. Then we could say, like, if there's a therapist that is politically very conservative, for example, what does that do to his or her ability to speak to liberals? Like, I would have an answer to this, but I'm interested in yours. Like,
it's not easy, especially these days. Certainly for me these days in America, it's difficult. I live in a very, very polarized society. I've never seen anything like it. So it can be very difficult. On the other hand, it's also a matter of taking it as a challenge. I like to take things like this as a challenge, to be able to speak to people whose views are very different from mine. Besides what I do, and this is part of the answer to your question, I don't just try to do this on one or two occasions. I try to live my life by not polarizing today. I really do that. I try not to polarize. I try to realize, I examine myself and see, one of the things I do is try to see what some people, very conservative people, I'm really very left, very, very left in my views, but if a very conservative person speaking, I try to grasp what they're saying and seeing if there's anything there that I do agree with. And often, I'd say almost all the time, there is. There's something there. I don't think we are, see the polarization in society, this is what Hillman would say all the time. It represents a polarization within ourselves. And we have to ask ourselves, am I divided? And am I dividing myself? So whenever I ask myself, can I agree with some of these ideas coming, not literally and not fully, but is there something there that I can both agree with and maybe have some empathy for? That's a start for me to be able to have a conversation that is not split too much.
Does this also speak to the ideas you explore in your books, that it's difficult, that it's important to keep the empty space or the non-understanding or the things in life that we cannot bridge by our understanding active in therapy as well? Is that part of this answer as well, that line of thinking?
Well, you use a key word for me, emptiness. Next month, in May, I have a new book coming out on emptiness. And emptiness has been very important to me. And I think that's part of what I just described, yes. What I'm trying to do is, I think a Zen Buddhist would say that if your political views do not have emptiness in them, are not empty in some way, then you're in trouble. You need some emptiness. And I have always striven for that kind of thing. I've been influenced by Zen for a good part of my life. And I love that idea of empty, that you don't take yourself so utterly seriously. Which another thought just bumped into my head. I know that I'm not being very logical with you today, but trying to explore a lot of territory. The thought that came to my mind was that since I was about 18 years old, I have been really dedicated, devoted to the work of Samuel Beckett. And I feel he's a very empty playwright. He's a writer who is able to have so much emptiness in his work. And that is, he shows us that you don't have to be so dedicated to everything, that you can have a lot of emptiness around things that are very important to you. And that's one of the things that I strive for. Let's say emptiness in religion. Like, for such a long time, I have not wanted to be persuaded or attached to a religious mission at all. And that emptiness there, that's an empty way of being, people call me a spiritual writer, but I feel very empty about my spirituality. And so it allows me, and I feel very comfortable with the emptiness that is there. So maybe your word there really is the answer to some of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I don't feel you're being illogical. I think I'm trying. I've asked a couple of questions that are quite difficult to answer without being very nuanced, and that's why I said, well, we'll take enough time to flesh it out a bit and see both sides, and then I think in the end, what I've come to know of you through your books is that, and through our conversation last week, is that this emptiness or this non-resolvedness and still being able to live with unresolved questions, or to talk with a friend, if you talk about lay therapy, to talk with a friend without solving their problems, but still being there for them and accompanying them and making a genuine connection in their conversation, that is actually the answer to a lot of questions we have in the spiritual, psychological realm. So I look forward to your book on emptiness. Perhaps, and what can we? Now that we are on the spiritual, now that we've landed on the spiritual a bit as well, perhaps we can talk about, because in your books, the two. I'm really looking for words now, but you have this. You have soul and you have spirit, and there is a difference, and there is also a similarity in a way. So you're known as the writer about the soul, and that's all fine and well, but you actually write a lot about spirit as well. So perhaps you can explain a little bit what you mean by these two notions. And a question I would have, and perhaps you can tie that into to the question of what these notions mean to you, is also, do they form a whole, or is there a third or a fourth notion we should take in consideration, or is this a complete enumeration of this aspect of our lives?
Well, Plotinus, who was the ancient philosopher who talked about the soul so much, would say, I think, body, soul, and spirit. Body, soul, and spirit. He would certainly not say body and spirit, would not say that. I've attended many conferences called Body, Spirit, or something like that, and I always felt that my interest was not represented in the conferences I was attending. So I think that 3 is a better number than 2 as well, just in terms of numbers. 2 tends toward division and polarization and splitting, whereas 3 is already a movement toward multiplicity and dynamics. That's a traditional idea about numbers. It goes way back, about the quality of certain numbers. So soul and spirit then can easily be put against each other, but I don't see them that way, but they are different. So soul, let me start with soul. Soul is embedded in life. It's part of life.
We lost the connection for a second there. Soul is, and then you were gone.
Soul is embedded in life. Okay. It's really in life. Like everyday life. Soul has to do with your home, how your home is, whether you're comfortable there. As Ficino said, do you live in the right geographical place? Are you in the right place geographically? He said that's one of the first questions you should ask, and that's a soul question. Am I living in the right place? A lot of people, decide that they're not, and they go and move somewhere, or they move around until they find a place. That's looking for their soul, really, I think, where their soul is at home. So it's right in the world. It's right there in your house, in your home. And it's in your family and your marriage, if or you're the person you are close to. And it's in your work, whether you love your work that you're doing. Is your work concrete enough? Can you Can you get your body involved in your work? Do you need an avocation to be able to get your body more engaged in your life? You know, like I do woodworking sometimes. It helps me a lot to feel engaged with the material. So, and then soul is certainly has to do with your emotions and your relationships, and we are an attachment. From the soul point of view, attachment is a great virtue. It's a wonderful thing. It's an excellent thing to pursue, attachment. Later, I'll mention, it's not so for the spirit, but these are two different things. And they're both aspects of yourself, so you have to do both somehow. So attachment is very important in the soul. Like, let's say I have traveled so much, and every time I leave home, I miss home. That's attachment. I'm attached to my home. That's a good thing. That's a sign of soul. The sign that soul is active and alive. It's a good thing to miss somebody when.
Can I ask you, because you're giving so many examples of this, you've said something about astrology. It's something you also use even in your client work, which I was very happy to hear, because Jung himself did that. You do it. I think it's a very logical way of deepening conversations, but it's great to hear like a well-known psychologist just publicly admitting, yeah, I use astrology and it helps me sometimes. But when you talk about the soul and the spirit, the soul seems to be all these water archetypes, like Cancer or Scorpio or even Pisces in a way. So it's the home, it's where you feel well, it's where you connect deeply to another soul, which is Scorpio. It's all these, or your relationship in a deep way. So almost all the words you use for soul seem to be water archetypes, and then when we come to spirit, they almost all seem to be fiery archetypes. So they seem to be, well, basically Sagittarius. Sagittarius, a bit of Aries perhaps, a bit of fun and passion from Leo, but mainly it seems to be Scorpio, the irresolvable hole that Scorpio causes in our life through death, through pain, through jealousy, through being, how do you say, left by a partner or betrayal. And then the Sagittarian attempt to still find meaning, or to still go forth and to still find new horizons, so to speak. Is this something that's in the back of your mind as well? Because it's so how do you say it? It's so striking to me as an astrologer to hear you use all these words that pertain to these archetypes. Or is that a coincidence?
No, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think the soul tends to be that way. The way sometimes some people that I respect talk about soul, and one of the great images of soul are the Greek nymphs. The nymphs around water, you know, the spirit that you get around water. And Ficino also recommends that to care for your soul, you should sometimes just be around water. That's what's required. By water, he means a stream or a lake or the ocean. But the Greeks had a different named spirit for each of those bodies of water. There were oceanids, there were naiads, there were different. There were nymphs of the spring. So I think if we could restore, and astrology does something very similar then, saying that these are images for different types of soul, the different aspects of the soul. And all soul experiences are not going to be moist. They're not. You could have a dry soul experience, I think. You could have a quick soul experience. I think you probably could find soul in a rocket ship going off to Mars. But basically, it's a highly spirited activity, trying to get away from the Earth.
And wouldn't that be a moist aspect to an otherwise very fiery endeavor?
Yes, I think there could be a soul aspect to it. For example, the astronauts, I think the astronauts are generally what we call in our psychology puer, meaning boyish. That boyish spirit, a spirituality that's quite boyish, wanting to get off the Earth and fly kites and have model planes and be a pilot, all those things. So the astronauts up there, and yet the astronauts sometimes are caught by the beauty of what they see. And they become meditative. I think there's a soul moment there that they don't have much time for, but it becomes very important when they return and describe their experiences, looking out the window.
Almost all of them do. It's quite magical, actually.
So I should, though, can I interrupt you? I should say something about the spirit, though, equally, to describe the spirit.
Yeah, let's go there. Yeah, please.
I described the soul in various ways. Now, the spirit, I said the soul wants to be attached and be at home and be in the body, but the spirit is there. Fortunately, in human beings, there's a real spirit in them, and they want to move ahead in life. They don't want to just stay home. They want to move into their work or discover the world or travel or read or watch movies about other places. That's a very important part of being a human being, to get away from home, to rise, to be on these, to achieve and maybe go through steps of achieving something. That's a very spirited kind of thing to do. And ultimately then wanting to know, okay, like Sean O'Casey, this Irish playwright says, what is the stars, he says, in that Irish way. What is the stars? What are the stars? What is all that? Trying to figure out the world we live in the universe. That is also very important for human beings to transcend where they are. But it's a very different, very, very different direction from staying at home and being attached to the home and with your friends and family. So now these things can be in conflict very often, but I think what you want to do as a human being is be both spiritual and soulful at the same time. And these two, the idea is that these two can overlap and they can connect with each other, but sometimes they're very far apart. And that's okay too. But when they're far apart, you have to watch out that you don't go into extremes.
Yeah, and that's, I think it's a very, I was very happy to find that distinction in your work and the way you, because usually if spiritual people can be very much into the images or into the emotion, like very Piscean quality, like I'm doing psychedelics and I'm off into this dream world. But there's also this spirituality which is more about finding a new horizon or ascending the mountain or finding the mountaintop and finding meaning, like a meaning that transcends the earth in a way. And it's very rare to see both these sides like really explored in their own merit. But it does leave you with this with this split between them, and how do they relate to one another? Can you perhaps say a little bit more to that split or to that?
Well, I think they may require some intention on your part. You know, living the art of your life, the art of living your life, the art is to be able to know where to be spiritual, how to be spiritual, what your limits are. You know, what you need as a person, where your soul could be wounded by it. Like I had this terrible experience when I was a young man. When I was 13, I left home to become a monk when I was 13. And the most difficult, certainly the most difficult thing was to leave my much beloved family. I loved my family, I mean, dearly. And I left them to join this monastery at 13. I could never do that now. You know, I would never do it the way I am now. But I did. And that's a great struggle and pain and homesickness and something I have never got over. It's still one of the great pains of my life to reflect on leaving my family for that. I see the value in having been pushed into this bigger world from a young age. And I'm still using things I learned when I first went off to study. And I learned how to study then. I learned all kinds of things. So it was great for me, for my life now. But a terrible, terrible thing to leave your family. So it's not resolved for me. And it's a conflicted emotion. but it's one that I think I just have to live with it, with that level of conflict. So sometimes spirit and soul are really, they don't get resolved, but you have to live them. You just have to live them with all the discomfort and pain they might entail without the pleasure of resolving them in your mind somehow.
Emptiness, again.
Yes.
Or unresolvedness, yeah.
Yes, exactly. That kind of emptiness.
Yeah. I have a few ideas of very. I have an unending amount of questions for you and topics I'd like to discuss with you. But is there, because I've been firing questions at you for I think almost an hour and a half now. Is there something you would like to the direction you'd like to go in to balance things out? Perhaps have we gone too much in one direction or the other, or are we doing okay?
Well, I think we're doing fine, very much so. I think that you may, I don't know how you feel, but we have not gone the direction that that we did in our first conversation together. But I like this. I like being able to be fresh and go at it. There's one area, it's not something of great concern for me, but it's one area of my life that we haven't discussed that is of interest to me. Mm-hmm. And that is magic. When I wrote my dissertation and had to study those Latin texts, and I translated this long book by Ficino from Renaissance Latin, which is very difficult, not so easy. It's not like Thomas Aquinas or other Latin authors. So I translated that, and I worked on it. And the book I translated was about what they called magia naturalis in Latin, natural magic. What that means is that we can be in the world in a soulful way, because Ficino was interested in living soulfully, living with soul. What we do when we live in the world with soul is we rely more on magic than our own logical powers. We rely on magic, but it's not an otherworldly magic. That's why they call it magia naturalis, a natural, ordinary magic. Just magic in life. And so what I'm saying is I read this in Latin. That means I read it very closely, word for word, and translating it, into English for me, trying to get the exact meaning of the words. And so I was very, very intense in studying magic for several years. And so this has become part of my approach to life and my writing, that magic is an important thing. That means that we don't try to be logical about everything. That part of life is to be more serendipitous, which is a kind of magic. Astrology certainly is a kind of magic that was part of Ficino's magic. And doing things at the right time, that was a big part of what he did, picking the right time. Don't just do everything anytime, do things at the right time. I think that's one of the bases of astrology. By the way, I'd like to expand astrology. I'd like to read the clouds as well as part of astrology. To look at the sky and to read the sky for direction in life. That's what Ficino recommended. So that's a kind of magic. And I've tried in my life to follow the hints of where I should go next. I've always done that. And so that's a kind of magical way of living too. It's not, I don't do what's logical and intelligent. I do what is magical, what the signs indicate. I read the signs always, and I try to follow those signs and trust them. So that magical way of life, I think, could be included within the general care of the soul idea. And it certainly was when I was writing Care of the Soul. I was very close then, closer in time to my work in natural magic. It was definitely important to me. And the book Care of the Soul is total magic. As this book comes along in my mind and this title, and I write it, and suddenly I thought, before it was published, I approached my agent and I said, what happens if it's sell? Do I have to turn the money back, the advance that I got? I didn't know what would happen there. And suddenly the world opens up for me through it. That is, and pure magic, has nothing to do really with, I couldn't make that happen again. It's just a magical moment. So that to me is part of living soulfully, is to live in a way that you read the world and you trust it so that you actually make your life decisions based on magic rather than on intelligence and logic.
How would one cultivate this? So for you, I'm almost tempted to start about your birth chart, but but let me just say it's very obviously something in your life that has worked very well for you, to listen even in your own will or in your own airy sort of power, in your own willpower. You've somehow relinquished that, but not lost it. You've relinquished it and gotten a higher sense of agency back, obviously. Yeah, that's because you listen to this, you attune to this, and your life flows in a way, and you trust it as well. Yeah? So you seem to have been very successful in dancing this dance with the cosmos, and understanding the quality of time. I very much agree with everything you've said about astrology. It's about the quality of time and understanding this in relation to ourselves. And everything can be part of this. It's a bit more difficult to systematize the clouds. I think that's why I wouldn't do it myself. I'd need a lot of time for that. But yeah, but basically I agree. But so what kind of there's a lot about this in your books, obviously. But just for our listeners and viewers, perhaps as a taster, how can we dance this dance with the cosmos successfully?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What I mean is that I don't know that this applies to everyone. So I don't usually recommend that people do this. I've done it, and it worked. It has really worked for me. I describe how it works for me, but I don't encourage it for others because I don't know if everyone can do that. Or I mean if everyone has that particular approach to life. It has really, really been mine, and I trust it, and I believe in it, and I think it's very effective. When I teach, I try to bring that too into my teaching. I'm teaching an online course now, and I always tell the people when they start that the most important lesson we will have in this course is on Hermes. Because we have to learn how to navigate the world illogically or not logically and not linearly, but some other way. And Hermes was the god behind magic as well. So I also tell them that I'm an Epicurean. That means that my primary values in this teaching are going to be friendship and pleasure. That's what we're looking for here, friendship among ourselves and pleasure in what we learn. And I think these are not the values of our society today too much. So I try to encourage those. And to me, they all fit together. My Epicurean outlook on life, my studies of Greek polytheism, and my studies of 15th century magic in Europe, they all fit together. They all contribute to a soulful life. So it's just the way I think. And I know it's a little unusual, and people find it unusual, and they don't understand it in many ways. But you have to be an individual as well and do it your own way.
Yeah, well, I think you do a very good job, both in your books and also in this conversation of bringing people into your way of thinking. and just offering that as a possibility. Like if you want to be more open to the mystery of the world, then there are ways to do that, and it can be very rewarding. But you'll have to let go of some dependency on perhaps knowing what's going to happen, or perhaps knowing what everything is, and then perhaps let go of a certain type of scientific worldview that you might have.
Well, for example, what you just said, I would say, instead of trying to think what's going to happen, what I do is advise developing a sense of prophecy, developing your capacity for prophecy as a kind of a magical thing, rather than trying to figure out the future. Yeah,
that makes... often when clients are very Mercurian, they have the South Node in the third house, or in twins, then or in Gemini, as you say, then I tell them to connect to Sagittarius. You need to be silent. You need to not think about what's going to happen, but you need to feel into the future. Yes, and you need silence to do that. You need to cultivate a silence in which you can feel what's going to happen. And I think that's exactly what you mean, right? With this
exactly.
sense of prophecy.
Exactly. You develop like an intuition about the future rather than try to figure it out.
Yeah, try to understand what's going to happen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's one, I think, one important methodological, because you try to share your your therapeutic approach in this book for the lay therapist as well. Perhaps we can close with one of the biggest tips you have, or one of the biggest parts of your own method, which is follow the symptom, which we also spoke about last week. Okay, and I think that's a very important way of also flipping the way people think about helping other people. They usually think, oh, I need to solve something, or I need to give advice, and instead of that, we've talked about giving them space just to breathe, just to listen, just to be with them. But also, perhaps a bit more technical, you can say follow the symptom. Could you explain what that means?
Yes, I'm so glad you thought of that. This is not my idea. This comes from Hillman and from people around him. But it's been very important to me, and I've really emphasized it. What it means is that when we have something that is symptomatic, or it's a complex we get caught in, for example, if you are having trouble, oh boy, I'm trying to think of a good example now of following the symptom. I guess it would be people who would say that they're having trouble with their memory. I don't know, that could be a symptom. I don't know why that popped in my head, probably because I'm having trouble with my memory right now. But I say now, if you might try various ways to fix it, to repair that. Like with people who are aging, you say, well, you do crossword puzzles. I do a crossword puzzle every day just for joy myself, but I hope that it might help. And so we get hyperactive in trying to overcome the symptom we have. The symptom could be, too, that a writer can't write. They get writer's block. This has not been a problem for me, but some people have that problem. And so they say, what can I do to write? And what I would say is follow the symptom and see what that symptom, not literally, don't just act on the symptom, but look at it deeply and see if it's not trying to tell you something positive in that symptom. Is my loss of memory, is it saying that maybe it's time not to have to understand everything quite so much and be aware of everything? And is it okay to let go? So if I forget things, it's okay to forget. Maybe I need to forget in certain areas. Maybe I've been too You can take this quite deeply. You say, maybe some memories of mine have been too pressing, and I need to let go of them. Memories, maybe painful memories of the past. Maybe there's a loss of memory that is really positive. So see, when I give that example, I'm trying to take, I don't just stick to the exact symptom, but try to go deep into it and see if it might imply a much larger and deeper sense of loss of memory in that case.
Yeah, so not like the example you use in one of your books is, I think, people that feel they can't have trusting relations with others, and they need to be more independent or more autonomous.
Yes, that's true. Yes, I do. That's right.
And
I know that one very well. Yes, some people feel they're going to become too dependent whenever they get in a relationship. Mm. And so they come to a therapist saying, can you help me become more independent? Now that's going the opposite. That's not following the symptom. That's ignoring the symptom and trying to get rid of it and go in the opposite direction. But in fact, what often happens, you see this, the person who is afraid of being too dependent is actually not capable of dependency. And that's what you discover quickly. They're not capable of dependency. And so it would, if you try to make them more independent, you're making matters worse when you try to get rid of that symptom. What you might do is listen to it and say, and what I would do is I'd say, let's not just talk about this relationship, let's talk about life in general, about how maybe you have been dependent, or look at the whole of your life and see if there have been moments when this has really been an issue. And I think when you do that, you discover you can sort of work that dependency to the point where it works well with your independence. And then the independence is freed up to come in and join, so that then you're dependent and independent at the same time, ideally.
Yeah. And you don't disavow the experiences you've had with being with your difficulty in experiencing dependency, because you did experience those. Not that you experienced these for a reason, or if you have trouble memorizing things, or your memory doesn't help you, then perhaps there's a reason for these kinds of experiences, and we can help each other go into this and live with it, and
Yes.
Perhaps I think I think this is one of the longest talks we've had on this podcast, and it's been a nice and winding road. Is there something we can? Perhaps we can, in closing, there was an article in the paper. Perhaps it's a too big a question, but there was a paper article this week that in the Netherlands, in the aftermath of this whole COVID experience we've all had, there are a lot of childhood suicides, and there's a lot of depression, and a lot of people that have difficulty navigating their way through this world, especially the last couple of years. And well, I would say this is one thing I can weave it in here. If our Dutch viewers want to, I have this. I read this in English in your own words, but it's been translated and it's just come out. And so this is unread. It's clean, and I can give it to one of our viewers or listeners. Just leave a comment with the name of the book. I won't say it because otherwise YouTube's translation mode will get all groggy. But if you put in this title and an exclamation mark in one of the comments, then I'll pick one of you guys and send it to you, so you can enjoy it as well. So I think that's one of the things we can do. We can read books by soulful authors, as you say in the book. So I'll throw that one back to you, and call you one of these soulful authors. But if is there like an advice you would have for the world, or something we could do collectively to make it a little bit nicer and a little bit better?
Yes, I'm thinking of writing about that question right now, as a matter of fact, based on the transcendentalists here where I live, especially Henry David Thoreau. I'm writing about him right now. And I think that what they teach, and it's for the world today, is that we need to take our lives thoughtfully and seriously. It's funny, at the same time, when you talked about children committing suicide, I think about the fact that our child, the child in us is not very much alive today. People are so worried about everything and responsible. And there's not a lot of playing and the playfulness in the world in general. You don't see it as much. Mm. You see this terrible weight on it. So I think that, as someone would say, when you talk about child suicide, you always have to think of the archetypal child, not just the actual children. We act on the archetypal child through children. And we are giving children a life. We just had this terrible experience yesterday in our country. 3 children were killed and 3 adults in a school. It's been happening constantly. And there's something going on about the child there. So I think we ought to reflect on our childhood, on the child spirit in us, the child spirit in our society, and see how healthy it is, and see if there are some ways in which we could revive the child.
I love that answer. Thank you. That's. I think that's a nice send-off. Is there anything you would want to say before we finish, or can I thank you very much for joining us?
To say that I've enjoyed this conversation with you. I know we've gone on for quite a while, but I could go on for another 2 hours, I think, with you. I rarely have met someone that I can have such an easy conversation with, and that is such a soulful thing. Another key word for soul is conversation. And not telling someone what to do, but having a deep conversation with someone, and a pleasant one, a pleasurable one, an Epicurean one. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate first your invitation to talk on this very, very wonderful program that you've created here, and to have me, come back to life to talk about things that are so important to me, so intelligently and heartfully with heart. So I just want to say how much I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been our pleasure, and perhaps after your book comes out in May, your new book about emptiness, we can have a whole new conversation sometime if we find.
I'm very tempted to join you in person.
Yeah, that would be nice. We'll discuss that. Let's first. So thank you very much for coming on, and I've enjoyed it to talk to you twice now in a week, very much as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for listeners and viewers. And we'll see you next time. Have a good day.